Everyone, this is my last DIY holiday related video of the year, so don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'm going to talk about using grapevine wreaths. I'm actually going to use 3 different sizes in this video and show you how I'm going to decorate them. And it's also kind of a combination video because I'm also using leftover materials from other projects, and that's the key here, is trying to utilize what you have and keep things on budget but still super stylish, and finding ways to either use them in your home or give them as gifts. So for the largest grapevine wreath, I wanted to use leftover materials from my Anthropologie dupe wreath, which you can find the link to in the description of this video. And then I had also picked up some greenery, some actual real dried greenery from my local craft store, and I hadn't used it yet, so I decided I was going to incorporate it on this wreath. And then I actually had some rolls of burlap ribbon in my basement that I have had for eons, and every so often I find a use for them, and this was one of those cases. And let's get started. So the first thing that I did was placed my greenery throughout the wreath where I wanted it. I kind of made it come off of my wreath in 2 different directions, and I didn't have a lot of it. I also didn't want this wreath to look overgrown with greenery, so I carefully just placed the greenery kind of rounding around the wreath, coming out from 2 different directions from kind of bottom middle, and then I wired it into place. I did try and tuck the ends in between some of the grapevine branches of this wreath just so they were a bit more hidden, and I had green floral wire that I used. And once I had everything exactly how I wanted it, I went ahead and grabbed my few leftover beige bottle brush trees that I used in my other wreath. Now, I didn't have a lot of size variety. I just have 2 different sizes that were left, but I had quite a few of them. So I decided to kind of scatter them naturally along the bottom half of the wreath. I didn't want to go too crazy. I didn't have enough to go crazy, and I didn't want them on the top. I just kind of wanted this to look more like a little mini forest at the bottom of my wreath. And I was actually inspired to do this from another high-end wreath, and I will insert the picture here just so you can get an idea. Next year, I want to try and recreate this actual wreath with different sizes of bottle brush trees that are more accurate to what the original was. But I thought I could still get away with the vibe of this wreath by using what I had left. There are a ton of YouTube videos out there on how to create bows and ribbons with ribbons, so if you want, you can YouTube or Google that. I'm not perfect at it, so I won't get into it here, but I did take my quite wide burlap ribbon and I cut it in half for this bow, because if I used the full width, it was just too overwhelming. So once I cut it in half, I simply made my bow with some wire, and then I used twine to finish off the center of the bow and hide the green wire that I used. And then I attached with the wire that I had wound the bow with to the branches of the grapevine wreath. And after that, it was finished. It was an extremely easy and quick wreath to make. It's very simple. It's kind of farmhouse. It's kind of rustic. It's not too overwhelming. It's very subdued, and I really like that. I just wanted something simple to hang on my kitchen chimney hood, which is a kind of dark earthy gray shiplap my husband made custom to go with our white cabinets, and I wanted something to hang up there for over the winter that kind of coordinated with my Anthropologie dupe wreath, which is actually hanging in my living room right next to the kitchen. I really love how this turned out. Like I said, it's quite simple, quite subdued, very farmhouse, and just a touch of that Anthropologie wreath vibe, and I just love it. The next wreath we're going to talk about is the smallest 3-inch little grapevine wreath that I actually found at one of my local craft stores when I was buying my other holiday supplies a few weeks ago. And I decided that I was going to get out my little bits and bobs that were left over from all of my other projects that I did and see what I had to work with. So actually a pack of bits and bobs that I had gotten from the dollar store had these little white rustic looking flowers in them, and they're almost like a wood texture. So I decided that I was going to use those on this smallest 3-inch grapevine wreath. I simply chose a couple of the flowers that I liked the best. Some were more open looking than others, and I hot glued them to the front of the wreath in a little trio nestled into the bottom left. Once these pieces were glued and dried, I simply took some extra twine that I had lying around and created a little hanging bow, just like I did with my ornaments. I think it turned out so charming. I feel like you could hang this on your stair garland, you could hang this off of your fireplace, on your actual tree, or you could even hang it off of gifts to give to loved ones or friends or coworkers for the holidays. And it looks just like this extra personal touch to your gift. There are so many ideas for these little wreaths out there, and I hope you're inspired to look some up and make one yourself. Last but not least is the 6-inch size grapevine wreath, which I really wanted to do in a boho style because I loved the boho DIY ornaments that I made. So I took my leftover winter pampas grass stem and I decided I was going to snip pieces off of that to use in my boho grapevine wreath. So I grabbed my floral wire and my wire cutters and started cutting some of the little branches off of the stem. I simply bent the stems before putting them on the wreath into more of a rounded shape so that they would flow more naturally, and I started placing them in a circular motion in one direction going around the entire wreath. And some of the stems, since they're kind of fluffy, they were overlapping each other where I had put the wire, so you really didn't notice that when I was putting everything together. And when I was done attaching all of my stems, I simply took some of my leftover blush ribbon that I also used in the ornaments because I loved the look of the blush with this kind of winter pampas grass, and I tied that to the top of my wreath and then started experimenting with how I could display and use this wreath. A couple of options I looked at were the typical classic Hallmark style of hanging a wreath off of your cabinet doors, which I love the look of and I've never done. Now, this wreath does not match the style of the Farmhouse larger grapevine wreath I hung on my chimney hood, so I will not be keeping these side by side this year, but next year I do want to make more mini 6-inch grapevine wreaths and hang them on my cabinet doors because of how great this turned out. The other way I wanted to try and use this wreath was on gifts. So I have seen all over Pinterest and some of the high-end stores that people have taken these mini wreaths and they have used them on the front of their gifts, and they've tied them with string and twine and burlap and made them beautiful. And I really wanted to try that, so I grabbed my Magnolia cookbooks, and I tied this wreath onto those and a stack to see how that looked. And I'm actually not gifting these books, but I am going to leave it tied on there set as a display in my kitchen, which is another way that you could use these mini wreaths displayed in your home if you love them. Thank you guys for taking the time out to watch and for all your support since I started posting these DIY videos, and you can expect more videos coming your way.